On his deathbed, Henry VII had made the young Henry promise to marry Catharine of Aragon. Having delayed 6 years after the betrothal, the old king finally gave in. He also left a sum of money to secure masses for his soul so long as the world lasted, which it was generally believed would be less than 200 years. Henry VII died on April 21st, 1509, and was buried several weeks later in the unfinished chapel in Westminster that was to bear his name. As soon as the funeral was over, Catherine and Henry VIII went across the Thames River to Greenwich Castle. There, in the first lovely days of June, they were married very quietly in a small chapel close by the castle wall. This was their favorite chapel, and because of those first happy days of her marriage, Greenwich was always to be Catherine's favorite residence. Marriage to Henry. It had come at last, what she had longed and prayed for night and day for 7 miserable years. After her mother's death, Henry VII had considered her of less worth, and her position at court became almost unbearable. Whenever she saw the king, he reminded her that she was only living on charity, that her father still owed him half of her dowry. "Why does His Highness not keep his word?" he would ask. "You have no claim on us. It is only our good will that makes us give you food to eat." Catherine wrote her father pitiful letters begging for help, but she got no reply. Not one gold piece did Ferdinand of Aragon ever send his daughter after she left Spain. "I have now sold some bracelets to get a dress of black velvet, for I was all but naked," she wrote him in one letter. "Till now the dresses I brought from Spain have lasted me." Now on this shining June morning of her wedding day, those black years of humiliation were behind her. Catherine's heart was full of thanks to God as she walked along the lattice-covered path from the chapel to the castle. Her handsome young husband towered above her, his golden hair dappled with sunlight shining through the leaves. Henry, having reached the age of 18, was nearly his full height of 6'4", and he was fairly bouncing with good spirits, delighted to be alive. The coronation ceremony was set for Midsummer's Day. Henry and Catherine spent the preceding night, according to ancient custom, in the royal apartment in the Tower of London. The next day, happy crowds of Londoners lined the way, waiting to see and cheer their young king and queen as they rode from the Tower to Westminster Abbey. Henry, who sat extremely well on horseback, wore a robe of crimson velvet, furred and white ermine. Catherine was seated on a litter of gold cloth swung between 2 white horses. Her gown was of white satin, and her golden hair hanging loose was of very great length, beautiful and goodly to behold. It was a most joyful day for everyone. The young king was so happy with his queen that he wrote his Spanish father-in-law, "If I were still free, I would choose her for wife before all others." Catherine, who had remained loyal to her father in spite of his neglect, wrote him of her love for Henry. "Among the reasons that make me love the king my lord, the strongest is his filial love and obedience to your highness." And she added, "Our time is spent in continual festivals." Life at court under the young king was truly one continual festival. His father had filled the treasuries of England to their brim, and this was now his to dip into and spend. The world was his to enjoy, and he was tireless in pursuing every sport, art, and amusement. A day spent in hunting might be followed by a masked ball. Another day might bring a tournament, followed by a banquet for 100 knights or more, and that followed by a concert at which Henry, having jousted and dined with equal gusto, would sing a song he had composed, playing his own accompaniment on the lute. Night after night there would be dancing, in which the king would lead out one lady after another, leaping and cavorting and kicking his heels in the air long after everyone else was exhausted. The center of life for this rollicking royal playboy was Catharine, his perfect foil, his most appreciative audience. Wherever she might be, he sought her out to show her an interesting new book, share an amusing story with her, or relate a fascinating bit of news. He would dash away from his friends, saying, "The Queen must hear this." Not being overly sure of himself, despite his blustering, Henry often asked her advice. She gave it so smoothly and tactfully that he felt he had made the decision himself. Being very pious, he heard vespers and compline every day with Catharine, who often spent 6 hours a day on her knees in prayer. For a marriage that was to end in disaster, it had a most happy beginning. The crowning joy for both of them would come when Catharine had fulfilled her duty and borne an heir to the throne. Their first child was a little girl born dead, but on New Year's Day, 1511, guns boomed from the Tower of London, bells rang out all over the city, streets blazed with bonfires along the Thames, alehouses ran with wine, and everyone drank to the great good fortune of England. A royal prince had been born, who was alive and healthy. Couriers dashed off to announce the good news to all the courts in Europe. The infant was christened Henry. In celebration, a magnificent tournament was held in Westminster, in which the proud king was one of the chief jousters. Announced as Sir Loyalheart, he galloped into the pavilion, which had been sprinkled with the golden initials of himself and Catharine. The merry-making was contagious and got completely out of hand. Crowds of cockneys from outside broke in and carried off all the gold initials and ornaments they could get their hands on. They ripped the gold lace from the ladies' dresses. They stripped Henry down to his doublet and hose, and some of the knights still further, before the guards finally succeeded in pushing the unruly creatures out with the butts of their battle-axes. There was still great hilarity and laughter as the king and queen and their disheveled, half-undressed guests sat down for dinner. Meanwhile, at Richmond Castle, the baby boy was dying. The nobles who had come to Westminster for the tournaments and celebration of his birth stayed on with the heartbroken parents for the funeral of little Prince Henry, only 52 days old.